Pleased to introduce Dr. Yilu. She's at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. She's also the governor's chair at the University of Tennessee. And she's the deputy director of Current, which is a DOE NSF engineering research center. And she's done quite a few things. The one I know her most about is creating FNet, which is a frequency monitoring system that's used by NERC to monitor compliance with frequency control rules in the United States, throughout North America. And let's hear what you want to talk about today, Yilu.
All right, thanks, Joe. Okay, so I'm glad in one of the presentations Guohui did, he showed a number of 73.9 penetration level. I was so excited to see that because when we initiated this work 3 years ago, I was hoping to get the percentages. This is instantaneous penetration levels. I was trying to push for 60, 80, and I heard argument, no, you never get that high. But remember, solar has only on for a very small period of time. In order to get high amount of energy, you really need the instantaneous penetration level to be extremely high. So we go all the way up to 80. We build models for the grid, and then look at the performance of high penetration levels, and look at what possibilities we can exercise using inverters and using headroom to actually help with the frequency response analysis. This is work funded by the Solar Office, led by Oak Ridge with partners from University of Tennessee, NREL, and I do have my GE partner here, Mao Zhonggong is here. He can answer all the inverter related questions. So basically, major things we're going to introduce is how do we build the high PV models for all three interconnections based on industry grid models to begin with. And one emphasis we wanted to mention is you cannot just take the model and start building. You have to start from accurate starting point. Basically, there's quite a lot of work involved, validation the model and make it match today's measurement, and then be able to build onto it. Okay, and we look at all the way to 80%, from 20, base case 20, 40, 60, 80% renewable. And I'm sitting there when Guohui was showing the 73.9, I said, oh God, we may still not enough when we look at the 80%. So we may have to push really high. Also, we look at the GE production grid inverter model and GE tried to put in the frequency control, which combine the inertia and the governor control to use the headroom of the PV to actually help improve the frequency performance. Okay, so the first thing I'd like to mention is how do we deal with the model problems. You start with a model that actually quite far from a measurement after you looking at some second later. So there are two major things we discovered in the earlier study is the governor ratio was not actually accurate. This is particular for Eastern Interconnection for the MMWG model. It's quite far. It's actually set as 80%, but in reality, there's probably close to 30% governor turned on. So you have to really make those adjustments. Another critical thing is the deadband. WECC model are a lot better. They have the deadband in, but the Eastern doesn't have. Since we push that very hard, several of utilities, MISO, Dominion, New England has started to put deadband in, but in the general MMWG model, they're not there. So those has to be put in. So once you put in, you adjust the governor ratio and you put in the deadband, you can be very accurate in terms of baselining the models, which is, this is what I'm talking about is the 70,000 bus models of the entire Eastern Interconnection. So here we picked several distribution, several locations for model validation. and we're able to match reasonably well in terms of where we are. And then for the same thing we do for ERCOT system, and also the aerial team did the validation for the WEC system, and with that we start our building of the high PV system. So this is basically a summary of the cases we have to build, and the 18 cases altogether. And later on we added other things, so there's probably 20 plus cases that ready to be disseminated for in the proper way. You know, you cannot do it like the Google, you know, the AlphaGo, or you just release to the public. This is infrastructure information. We have to release it to the proper people in order to facilitate, you know, studies. And this is just one example of where we, how do we place solars for the future. It's based on cost, irradiance, and other factors. And you can always argue, well, this may not be extremely accurate in terms of projection, which I agree. But since we are looking at interconnection level study, and we have shuffled the solar location quite a bit, the study result from the interconnection level are very similar. So that I can assure you in terms of accuracy, the arrows for a true distribution versus a projected distribution for the system level are under very tightly controlled range. Okay, so what do we find? So we built all the models. Of course, you go through all this painful processes of not converging and all those. And we built all the models, and here's what we find for Eastern interconnection. We actually have quite a bit margin all the way to 80% renewable, and we really don't touch the nadir required by NERC in terms of frequency response. That's one of the criteria. However, Eastern has do have one issue. Some regions, if you have a high penetration, you actually violate the interconnection frequency responsibility criteria. So if you have a lot of solar, you're supposed to provide that much frequency response, and you're not able to meet that in the Eastern interconnection in some local areas. But overall, we are in good shape in terms of getting to 80%. I would suspect we're probably good at 90%, although pushing to 90, 95% in the dynamic study, it's very tricky, and it probably need to be done as a next step. Since we're 73.9 already, we didn't get very far on that one for this particular study. Yes?
Sorry. What were you allowing your PV systems to do in terms of response characteristic?
In the before we do the response study, everything is voltage control. Yeah. Okay, so I think Ben is asking, in this study where I'm showing the EI, what is the PV doing? What's the control settings? In this case, we didn't have any response in terms of frequency. We just set everything as a voltage control at terminal. This is a benchmark. But remember, we have 70% governor hasn't been turned on in this case. Of course, you don't have that much once you get 80% because you have only 20% of the conventional generator around, right? But we got a lot of room. Yeah. Yes.
So you said that how did you choose what units to take offline? Is it equal proportion?
Yes. At this point.
Or did you just take off units that didn't have governors?
Pretty much all units can have governors. So we basically evenly distributed the units in terms of governors. Yeah, and also when we take the solar, put the solar in, we based on the Plaxos location. One thing I wanted to mention is we didn't do any build out. For the EIPC study, they did the wind build out, but we don't want to turn this into a build out study. So no change in the grid topology. We basically remove the conventional generator with solar. I think that's good to qualify. Okay, so ERCOT, we know ERCOT is already dealing with this. So, when we look at the standard contingencies NERC required, and they are actually having issues for the largest contingency and the second largest contingency. And they are doing a lot of work now using load for control. So load has been their method, and that's a next thing I think I heard already, that they're looking into energy storage, but not as aggressive as Florida, which has 400 megawatt. Okay, WECC only during the very severe case with the largest penetration, which is 80%. Remember, 80 is actually an old high. And very soon, I think we may have to deal with what happens 90–95%. Right now, it's very difficult to run your large system at this percentage, but I think we have to face it. Now the reality is already getting very high. So WCC, we have one extreme case where you have to deal with the frequency response based on this study. Okay, so what can we do? We can definitely use the existing resources. EI, we don't have issue. We mentioned ERCOT, the using load response, which is what they have been using successfully. Another thing unique about this particular study is to say, okay, why do we have to give the burden of the solar cost to something else? Why don't we solve it based on using, the headroom? Like, we had mentioned before, headroom can be used AGC. Actually, headroom can be used much faster situations beside AGC. So GE took over their wind inverter model, which is the GE Brilliance system, and they, have, based on that, they developed the solar model. What GE did is they put in the frequency response. Overall is inertia plus governor response, and they have developed. We developed the control and tested over on their 1 megawatt RTDS setup over there. And also we did a bunch of work on the current UTK hardware testbed system, and basically the work we did here is implementing control algorithms allow the inverter to do inertia control, which is faster usually expected than the governor, and the governor control. Now, remember the inertia control difference between the governor control, besides the apparent time difference, actually you respond to different things. The inertia control, you respond to the slope of the frequency drop, and the governor, you respond to the delta F, how much frequency you dropped. Okay, so that's fundamental difference. Here actually showed the inverter performance for one of the cases where you can actually, once you enable the two control, you can leave some headroom. You can very easily take care of the frequency response issue that's created by solar. And then a follow-up work is to say, okay, we have proven there's a need, at least for some of the system, to respond, and there's also developed a control algorithm. What do we need to implement? One key critical thing you need is the inertia of the system. And so one of the follow-up project, we developed a machine learning-based algorithm that I'm very happy about it, is it only uses local frequency. It doesn't need anything else, just the local frequency to be able to reasonably predict my inertia of the entire system. And once you have that, it's very powerful, because then you don't have communication, you don't need communication. You can actually respond very intelligently, either behind meter or, with large bulk solar system, and be able to contribute to the grid. So based on this, I like to identify a few challenging issues that need to be addressed. First, I'd like to find a way to be able to provide those high solar models to give it to the right hand, be it utility, be it national lab, be it whatever, to start studies in a much broader sense. I wanted to, so that's one thing. I think we find out that there's a lot of other things, not just the media we talked about today. That's just one obvious thing. But there's many other issues you have to deal with. One of the issues we studied at the request of the Florida Power is the out-of-step relay performance between Florida and Georgia. How is this going to impact my out-of-step relay setting? And we find out that need to be revisited. We also find out that, the oscillation frequency change, the inter-area oscillation damping change as the solar start to penetration increase. And we also find out that the transient stability become hard to manage. The critical clearing time gets shorter and shorter as you increase the penetration level. And the voltage is obvious. Many of you already seen the problems of the voltage when you have the solar in, there's local voltage issues that you need to deal with besides other high frequency oscillations. Here I'm only touching the inter-area oscillations. So those things need to be visited. And lately we have seen very strong force oscillations in the eastern interconnection. And those things need to be visited before we, get into the solar into a large percentage in the system. Okay, let's see. Okay, so also location matters. So if we talking about putting energy storage in different locations, it would be nice to have them next to the solar because you can, minimize the distance and loss and everything. But also energy storage location across the interconnection also matters in terms of how to use those for oscillation damping and how to use those to meet the regional frequency responsibilities of the balancing areas. So those are things that need to be visited in general. Let me give something. I think I cannot finish a presentation without showing a movie, but let me see how much luck I can have on this one. See. Oh, it's working. Good. Okay. So basically, what we are showing is one thing I didn't mention is we have the frequency is electromechanical phenomena, and it will be affected in the sense that the electromechanical waves speed will speed up tremendously once you have a high solar penetration. So this is one of the things I was hoping to demonstrate. Of course, people would say, okay, can I use PV to damp oscillations? Yeah, we have shown we can use PV, we can use wind to damp oscillations, but there's always people arguing, I really don't want to, sacrifice that much PV room all the time. But with the inertia knowledge, you can always reserve the minimum needed because you know the inertia of the system. So that gave us a great advantage of being able to adaptively making the headroom reserves, if that's what we choose to do. Yeah, I mentioned the transient stability. So this is basically one of the preliminary studies showing as the penetration level go up, your critical clearing time drop. It's not linear, so you slowly drop, then at some point you drop dramatically. So those are the things need to be studied and looked into before, and predicting and then shaping policies in order to make sure the system is operate as reliably and resilient as we hope it to be. Joe, am I okay? All right, good.
Terrific.
Okay.
First sandwich at lunch. So we have lots of time for a question and discussion. So let's go Eddie and then Greg, and then I'll go back to that.
Thanks. I appreciate your work on the inertia for the interconnections. On your work on your assumptions of bringing the responsive generation down in order to validate, to calibrate your model, what assumption did you make for the load? The load has some inertia as well.
Yeah, the load inertia, usually the load inertia does not play extreme. It's a very good point. So we haven't, I listed two categories, right? One is the percentage of a governor. The second one is the deadband. Actually, on the third item, it will be the load. So luckily, the load are typically not synchronous generators, because synchronous generators inertia were reflected 100%. But if you are induction machine, you have the slack, you have the slip. So that inertia doesn't get reflected much as the synchronous generator. So the load inertia actually get discounted significantly in the true system.
Right, but the motors still do less work during that time.
The motors do less work
Yes.
in what sense?
Well, like, for example, like a conveyor belt that's moving rock.
Right.
Or Amazon.
Okay, yeah.
Well, the frequency changes. That belt
Mm-hmm.
works less.
Yeah.
Less work.
We have a separate project. Look at the load impact frequency response. So we basically look at the C load, the four motor load, the two motor load impact. Yes, they do, but actually they are at a slightly different degree. But not for this project. We won't be able to get to the scope, but maybe that's something I needed to add to this list that I'm looking at in terms of load response.
Yeah. And the reason why I asked that is that you may be overstating the only have response 25%, 30%, 5%.
Actually, I think you could be very right. Yeah. So right now, the load model part didn't change. So we kept the load at, it's not modeled with composite load like most of WECC, but we kept it constant to control the parameters for comparison.
So in the studies we've done, the load damping is about a fifth or less of the primary frequency control.
A fifth?
Yeah, or less.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going away.
Are you saying the
Because of
induction motors are leaving?
Because they're being coupled to the grid through inverters.
Oh yeah, you have the drives. Yeah, once you have the drive.
Let's move on to another question.
Good.
Yeah, thank you. You made a comment about estimating the inertia of the system based on frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate a little further on what you mean and how you?
Yeah, since we have filed patent, I think I'm safe to say that what we did, we have remember we operate this FNAT grid eye. So we look at the frequency and the oscillations of the system all the time, just staring at them. What we find that the load curve changes, basically the oscillation, the number of them, the magnitude of them, just regular oscillations in the ambient as a function of the load, and which is inverse function of the inertia. So that's the basis of the estimation.
There's a question back here. And I'll come back to that.
I know you always have hard ones. Yeah.
Simple one this time. You mentioned that it was very difficult to run the WEC system greater than 85%. What?
Actually, I didn't try the WAC, but I tried the EI, and we tried.
What was the difficulty in running?
We can see that trend as we move from 20 to 40, 60% of solar, the system becomes easy to convert, not converge. Yeah, we got up to 95, but not by real PV models, but by just, disable the governor, we're getting there, but, sort of faked it to 95. But for real, it ran into convergence issues. We didn't get a chance to dig in much because we're happy at 80 for Guohui's project.
So it was convergence from a numerical perspective or convergence from a transient simulation perspective?
I think both. Could be both. Yeah. We did find both.
You still have a question? Yeah.
I was just going to point out that when we think about the inertia coming from loads, someone said that the types of loads are starting to have more of an electronical interface, and so that's good. But it's not necessarily good because you can have constant power loads that actually tend to destabilize things even more.
Yes, precisely.
So the question is how much energy is stored locally in that load. If it's enough, it can be helpful to the grid. If it's not enough, it can be problematic.
I think Joe did that. You kind of replied in terms of 1/5. I don't know how to answer it in terms of energy stored in the load. Maybe we could, talk
after
after.
that load damping.
Yeah, this 1/5.
About a fifth of the primary.
Right.
frequency.
Is that what you're
But
getting
he's
to?
talking about the more destabilizing effect of inverters actually taking more power off the system because of trying to hold constant power in the face of declining frequency.
Oh, well, that's
So
probably
there's negative
depending on the.
feedback concern of
Mhm.
this inverter-based
Well,
control.
then you would probably be a function of how much those constant
One
power
more-
load.
One more question.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a big question that we can come back to later, but I wonder when you go to so high penetration of non-synchronous generation, to what extent do you think you have to totally reconsider their standard relay protection philosophy? I just don't know.
No, we haven't got into those at all. Yeah, but that's why we have this meeting here as well. Yeah, no, we haven't got into the protection part.
Okay, well, I'm gonna thank Lee.
I